Maybe looking for your car keys, and you look around the place and where are my car keys? Where are my car? I definitely put them on the table, and then I accuse my son of stealing them. Where are they? They're definitely here. They're definitely here. And as soon as somebody points them out, all of a sudden, like magic, the image appears. And you said, well, I definitely looked. And the reason that you didn't see them was because you didn't expect to see them. So the brain works as a predictive mechanism based on patterns. It's a pattern recognition device, and anything that is untoward is raised to consciousness, and that then has to be processed. That's why most people walk around in a trance, really. And unless something bizarre happens, like somebody's dressed as a pirate or Robin Hood or something, they're not going to remember.
Welcome to the Performance Initiative Podcast.
Our goal is to provide you and ourselves with the tools to be the best versions of ourselves.
We are your hosts, Dr. Grant Cooper
And Dr. Zinovy Meyler. We just wrapped up a conversation with Derek Borthwick, and it was a lot of fun.
We tackled questions like why you should perhaps never use the word why in a question.
I see what you did there. Also, how can you become better at communication and how to leverage the natural tendency that you have, whether it's an introvert or an extrovert.
And what is a good way to not be nervous when talking with someone who makes you nervous?
Also, how to best enter a group conversation in a social setting.
And there's really no one better to have been talking to about this than Derek Borthwick. Derek is the best-selling author of Inside the Mind of Sales, How to Talk to Anybody, How to Read Anybody, Eliminate Negative Thinking. He is an excellent author, an excellent person to speak with. He has over 30 years of experience. Derek has worked with some of the world's largest companies all over the UK and Europe. He is a wealth of knowledge, and there were so many takeaways.
There were too many things to go into because on every minute there was something that you can actually apply and why it works. Also, Derek mentions several experiments that are fun to watch, really educational, and what we'll do is we will put our links on our YouTube page so that you can go and look at those experiments and get a better sense of them.
Yeah, those are a lot of fun. Enjoy. Derek, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Grant. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation all the way from Scotland. Now, you write books that help people navigate life, and they're aptly named for the skill that they provide, such as how to talk to anybody, how to speak effectively without fear, how to eliminate negative thinking.
Right, and one of the things that we appreciate about your work is that you don't just give a list of questions or things to do, but rather you help people understand the underlying process and why we do things that we do, and therefore how to change.
Right, and you've created the Power to Mind method, and you draw from clinical hypnotherapy, NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, which, by the way, you very nicely describe as software for the mind, as well as other schools of thought, and from your own experience.
Right, so could we start with trying to understand the pieces that make up your system? And specifically, why don't we start with NLP? So, Is it right to think of ourselves as hardware running a software program in our brain, and if we understand the code well enough, we can reprogram for better performance?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at how reality is constructed, this is I was doing some training last week, and you have to really demonstrate to people that there isn't really any reality per se. What you have is you have an interpretation of reality. So you create your reality based on the data that comes in through your primary senses. For most people, visual is the largest component. That's the largest part of the brain, the visual cortex. And you make an interpretation of that. So to get really weird about it, the out there that we are seeing out there isn't really out there. It's actually in here in a 3-centimeter strip at the back of the brain. So what you have is you have electromagnetic impulses being created from the photons entering the retina, and the brain then does a very complex calculation of creating an image, and then it also ties that in with the sound. Now, if we have a look at we can use this as a couple of examples just to show you that you're not really seeing reality the way that you think you are. And I've got a couple of examples. I think there are some in the books if you check some examples there. But an obvious one is you may be looking for your car keys. And you look around the place and where are my car keys? Where are my car? I definitely put them on the table. And then I accuse my son of stealing them. Where are they? They're definitely here. They're definitely here. And as soon as somebody points them out, all of a sudden, like magic, the image appears. And you said, well, I definitely looked. And the reason that you didn't see them was because you didn't expect to see them. So the brain works as a predictive mechanism based on patterns. It's a pattern recognition device. And anything that is untoward is raised to consciousness. And that then has to be processed. That's why most people walk around in a trance, really. And unless something bizarre happens, like somebody's dressed as a pirate or Robin Hood or something, they're not going to remember. So
That happens in New York all the time.
so I believe. I'll have to head over there. So it's quite important. So when we create reality, we're doing it through the senses, as you said there, Zinovy, and we are creating our own mental map. Now, the key thing is in communication is once you realize that everybody has their own mental map, then life becomes a bit easier. Because let's face it, wouldn't life be so much better if everyone was just a bit more like us? and I don't know anybody that wakes up in the morning and goes, you know what, I'm a real awkward so-and-so. They think everyone else is. So that's why I spend so much time in the books, because my theory is that if people understand how they're wired and how we operate, then it makes it so much easier rather than giving them every single sentence to say. I mean, I'm sure we've been on courses before where somebody says, well, if you say this phrase, you'll close the deal. If it's a salesman, well, it doesn't quite work like that. It's not what you say, it's the way you say it. Remember, people will remember how you made them feel, not what you actually said. Human recall is very, very low. So it's important that we address people at their map of the world and their reality and not ours. That's if you want to get on with them. If you want to have conflict, then of course, force your own views.
That's one point that you made about expectation. It's very interesting that if we look at it from the perspective of medicine, when you teach someone to understand anatomy, and especially pathology in the anatomy, when we're looking at imaging like fluoroscopy, X-rays, etc., one of the schools of teaching is actually anatomy by expectation, and so you teach somebody to expect normal anatomy. And when you're kind of jarred by something that's not there, now you need to look for what that is and how to spot it and so on and so forth. And of course, everyone then develops their own way of dealing with it, but we need some kind of a scaffolding to do this. And one of the, speaking of expectation, a very interesting point you make in your book about expectations as we come into interpersonal communication, right? And you have people go through an exercise, if you will, to say, well, what do you expect when you're about to start talking to a friend or to someone new? So why do we have trouble, or why do some people have trouble talking to people they don't know?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I guess if you do it naturally, it's quite difficult for people who are a bit more extrovert like myself to understand. But I was quite shy as a child. And what I did was I've always had reasonable observational skills. So I just looked what other people did and kind of modeled it and thought, well, that works for them. I'll borrow this from there, borrow that from there. And then I studied the NLP. And let's face it, we don't have to worry too much whether NLP is accurate or not. The point is, does it work? And it seems to work. That's the main thing. We can get tied up in the intricacies. I guess that the biggest thing people have is, I would say most people have a very low awareness. It really is quite extraordinary. I mean, you can have fun with this, and please feel free to do this. When you're speaking to somebody, just throw in something in conversation. So I'll have fun with this, and I'll just say to somebody, oh, I'm writing a new book at the moment. And then, most cases, they won't even say, oh, that's interesting, tell me about it. They just completely ignore it and then carry on talking about themselves. So then I think, well, let's go fishing again. Now, I put some bait on the rod, it didn't work, so let's just try again. I'm just testing this to see how people react, you see. And the same thing happens again. You say, well, it's been quite hard work with this book. It's been harder than the other ones. And again, they may get this time, oh, really? That's interesting. And then move on to talk about themselves again. So the key thing is, if you want to be interesting, be interested. Now, the key thing is, in the book, I cover lots of techniques, but really you can do this very, very simply. All you have to do is have a natural desire to get to know someone and be naturally curious. So, for example, if we were speaking now, I'm looking at what's going on in the background. I can see different, looks like books and CDs. So I may say, oh, I know some books in the background. I'm curious. What do they cover? And if it happens to be your hot button, something you're interested in, suppose it was baseball or basketball, which I believe is big with you guys in the US, then if I press that button, we're off. I don't have to do much else. With introverts, it sometimes can be a little bit harder. So what we do is we use open questions, and we really have to draw it out. But most people don't really understand the nuances. Now, in the book, I talk about the echo technique, which some people think is quite mechanical. And again, you can have fun with this. Where I did this last week actually, where I was talking about the echo technique, and someone said, "Oh, I don't think this will work." And I said, "Oh, you don't think this will work?" And he went, "No, it's too obvious." I went, "Oh, you feel it's too obvious? Tell me, which parts do you feel are obvious?" I just echoed back. Eventually, everybody started laughing, and they said, "He's just been echoing you." So the reason that we do this is because, to use the NLP model again, that we create a reality based on, I could say something like, "I see what you're saying, Grant." Or I hear what you're saying. I hear what you. Sorry, I'll try again. I see what you're saying, Grant. Or I hear what you're saying, Zinovy. Or I can't quite get a grasp of what you're talking about. So there's different senses there. There's seeing, hearing, and then also the kinesthetic. The difficulty with that is your brain only has 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information it can hold at one point. That's how hypnotists hypnotize people. And one of the techniques is they overload the conscious mind, and it just can't cope. A bit like too much CPU in a computer, the computer just freezes up and then crashes. So the easiest way to do it is just to repeat back the words that somebody said. And let's face it, what's the most important words that anybody hears?
Their
own
words.
They've just said.
Yeah.
What's everybody's favorite topic of conversation? Themselves. Okay, you guys, so let's just say there's a picture of you and your family. Okay, somebody's got an old-fashioned, a Polaroid picture. You've been at an event and they hand it to you. Who do you look at first in the picture?
Yourself.
Yeah. So once we know how people are wired, because everybody's different, but it turns out not that different, then once we adopt an approach, this will give us the basics, the communication, and then it's just a matter of using your tonality and being curious to really develop that rapport with them. So getting back, answering your question, which I hope I have, I've gone around the houses a bit here, it's really a lack of awareness from people, and I would say a natural curiosity and a desire to get to know them. It's a bit paint by numbers. If I say hello, it usually goes like this: so what's your name? Where do you work? Or what do you do for a living? Do you live around here? And it gets very staccato. Whereas the easy way to do it is just you make an observation about the location, so you're not being too personal, particularly if you're talking to someone of the opposite sex. You don't want to say, "That's a nice dress you're wearing." It's a bit too personal. But you could talk about, if you were going down the street and you say, "God, there's a new shop there. Now, what used to be there before?" And immediately that piques curiosity. And then you're both together on the same side talking about the shop or the store that used to be there before, rather than asking personal questions.
Yeah. I love the idea, and it resonates so well that if you had a unifying theme, it's genuine curiosity, like a genuine interest in this person that you're talking to, and then everything else would more naturally flow from that.
It does, and you see, the outer expression is a reflection of the inner thought. That's how body language works. I mean, really, that's the book in that expression. And people may say, "Oh, I don't understand body language, I can't read it." And I'll say, "Well, that's not strictly true. If I was chasing you down the street with an axe, I think I know what my intention is." So it's more down to the subtleties. Can you read the subtleties? Rather than everybody can read the big picture and aggression. There's signs of that. But yeah, it's an interesting point.
And to your point, if there's not a genuineness, like you might say, I can't read body language, but like there was a doctor that we worked with. I don't want to come close to describing the person, but in New York, big place, and she would smile always the same way, which was just like just with her mouth, like, and it was very off-putting, right? Because like there was nothing in the eyes, so you knew. You know what I'm talking about. Yes. so you just knew that it wasn't genuine, right? And no matter how bad you might be at reading someone's body language, everyone recognized like, "Ooh, something's off." Like it just gave you like a chill because it was so dissonant. And that gets back to having the genuine feeling inside of you and letting that be evoked outside of you.
Sure, and if you look at life as a puzzle and be curious about it and think, well, the thing I've always found as well, it doesn't matter who you're speaking to, whether it's the guy digging the road outside or whether it's a university professor, you can always learn from somebody. So I remember that when they were digging the roads just behind me and putting the gas in, I was curious. I said, well, how do you stop the gas? Where does it go? And the guy was explaining to me, and then he was explaining the different materials they were using. So you learn things all the time, and if you've got that attitude, rather than I think I know it all and I'm not interested. The curiosity will serve you better, in my opinion. And then, as we've said, you get this natural. What happens is you get congruence. You see, it's very difficult to be congruent if you just don't care, right? But if you're actually interested, then it's so much easier. And showing interest is one of the biggest things you can do in rapport building, because most people don't pay attention to anybody or show them any interest. So if you show somebody just the slightest bit of interest, then they're really going to warm to you. And this is particularly important in business. Now, we don't have to go over the top with this, but I just mean a genuine interest, not fake. And you're right with the smile, Grant. They call that the Pan smile, which is, I mean, I've got quite a few wrinkles around my eyes now as I'm getting on a bit, but you usually see when you get a genuine smile, you'll see the wrinkling around the eyes rather than this kind of deadpan.
Yeah.
You know, which looks a bit weird, I've got to say.
Yeah, it's a little like, it seems a little pathologic, right? It's like
It does, doesn't it? Actually, a Stephen King movie or something, you know?
Right, exactly. Yes, yes.
Now, what do you make of the fact that people really act differently and freeze up around people that they're trying to impress? You know, you can have genuine interest in talking to someone who's working on the road or who's your coworker, but then when it comes to the boss or someone of opposite sex,
Romantic partner,
yeah,
that you're
romantic
interested
partner,
in, that kind of thing.
then
yeah.
people freeze up.
They do, yeah, and that's an interesting one. I mean, the attraction and seduction part is different because there's a whole different pattern of human behavior there. And what we tend to forget, I mean, we can use an example here. People start behaving really strangely when they go to work. Everybody. So we behave normally as human beings, and then we start going into logic mode and PowerPoint mode, where we have size 6 font, we have diagrams that even Einstein couldn't understand. We turn around, read the slide, and it's boring. There's no pictures, right? Now, that's not the way the brain works. Now, equally, you have to make an emotional connection with somebody to get on with them. That's what humans do. We're emotional creatures. We are emotional creatures justified by some sort of logic that we think is plausible. It doesn't have to be true for somebody to believe something. It just has to be plausible. Now, if you think about this, imagine that you saw somebody that you liked, an attractive woman that you liked, and you standing at the bus stop. You guys bus stop familiar with that phrase? Where you get the...
Yeah.
That makes it, okay. I'm just checking I'm not using too many colloquials. So you're standing at the bus stop, the woman's standing at the bus stop, and you go up and you hand her a list of 10 very logical reasons as to why she should marry you. How successful are you going to be?
So you've heard the story of me and my wife.
So you can have very logical reasoning, but it doesn't have an emotional connection. So when you're speaking to people at work, I get that the fact that you have to have, there is a number of human biases, one of which is deference to authority. So people do tend to believe authority, and that can come through education, through position, through titles, through uniforms. You know, policemen. What I mean, can you imagine going to the court and seeing the judge with his flip-flops, I don't know if you call those beach shoes, and shorts and a t-shirt with the baseball cap? I mean, it wouldn't really work too well.
Just wait, one more generation, we won't be there.
Yeah, but again, back to your point on people at work and you know, your boss, it's just a matter of showing an interest in them as well without being creepy. You know, you can't go along and ask them about intimate details about their children, but you could perhaps compliment them or ask questions about something you know that they value as important. You see, the thing in sales, where a lot of salespeople get it wrong, is you're taught on sales courses, sell the benefits. Well, that's not true. It's only a benefit if somebody else perceives it as. Like if a Ferrari can drive at 200 miles an hour and you think that's a benefit, but somebody else doesn't, it's not, is it? It's just a feature then. So you have to talk about, and one of the things you can do with these people is they're usually quite savvy. A lot of them are often dominant character types. So you'll see that with the big body language, you'll see that with the way they speak and the way they conduct themselves. So it can be quite intimidating. But nonetheless, everybody likes to have their feathers stroked and their fur tickled. So what I mean by that is compliments, particularly if it is something that they are proud of. So if they've transformed the company, or they're running the company well, then they will want to hear about it. Now here's a big trick you can use when you don't like somebody. There are people in this world who, you've heard the phrase, the town ain't big enough for both of us. Well, in some cases, the planet isn't big enough for both of us. In fact, the universe isn't. These people just really rile you. They wind you up. Their value set is everything that you deplore. You don't like anything about them. The trick here is, because we can't have, we live in a world of diametric opposites. You wouldn't know what light is if you didn't know what dark was. You have to have one. Having one brings the other into, having the opposite brings one into existence, each one into existence. I didn't explain that very well, but hopefully that got lost in the translation. So sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. Could you just refresh me where?
Yeah, the duality, that in some ways it sounds like you were going sort of, we almost appreciate the people we don't like because
That's
they
it. Yes,
make us
thank you.
appreciate the ones we do.
Thank you. It must be signs of age here. What signs of age? Yeah, so one of the tricks you can do is, what I do is I use this genuine desire, but I focus on something about them that I like. So you can take the emotional aspect out, and you may look at somebody and think, well, this person, I don't really like them, but they run a good business. Or perhaps they dress really sharply. Or perhaps they're very good with the kids. Right. Or perhaps they're a good sportsman. And I focus all my attention onto that, which then will change the way that I'm coming across with my inner thought being reflected in the outer expression. And that then builds rapport with people. I've had people who think that we are best of friends and that I really like them, when if they could read my mind, I'm afraid it's not the case.
Uh-oh. Yeah, I know.
Not you guys, of course, obviously.
No, obviously not.
Not you guys.
Have I dug a hole for myself, perhaps?
No, but that's wonderful because basically, at the end of the day, if you can't be consistent with your inner thoughts, the idea is, even if what you're trying to do is come across positively, right? And you want it, but you also at some level need to be consistent with how you truly feel. So you have to find something that you can latch onto and then let that positivity magnify outwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's being congruent and being sincere. And that comes through developing this genuine desire. If you develop a curiosity, then you're not being fake because you want to know how they dig the roads, or you want to know how a surgeon operates. You want to know how a psychologist does therapy with clients. If you show that the general desire, and you can give this in all sorts of walks of life. I mean, I went for lunch with somebody years ago, and we weren't naturally in the same wavelength, shall we say. But one of his hobbies was rowing. Now, I know nothing about rowing other than what I did in the park as a kid. So, but all you do is you just develop a sense of curiosity. So there's lots of things you could ask. You start common sense. What are the boats made of? Presumably years ago they were made of wood. They were made of. Oh yes, and they start talking about this. And then you say, how can you distinguish between a good rowing team and a bad one? What would you look for? And then they start talking about technique. And then another obvious thing is, does it matter the weight distribution, or what's better? Is it to have bigger, more muscular people, or to have lightweight people who are better with endurance? And you get them talking, and then they start opening up. And all you then do is say, that's fascinating, tell me more, or I'm curious. How does this work?
It strikes me as you're saying those things, my first thought was rowing. Yeah, I don't care about rowing. And then you ask those questions, and I thought, those are interesting questions. I'm actually interested in those answers. And it makes me think that there's a real skill set that you sort of have to, like, for some people, I'm sure it's natural, but I can also imagine that if you practice thinking of questions that you would have about different things that you don't immediately find interesting, that's a skill set that you can nurture, I would think.
Sure. I mean, you could just start off with the basic one, is how does that work, or how do they do that? If you have that mentality and you have to find it, think of it as like a puzzle.
Yeah.
And I would imagine
I was asking about an operation. There's lots of components to an operation.
Yeah.
But I think it's good a medical operation, it's good to have a working knowledge. So I read somewhere that the airlines and the medical profession had ended up borrowing a procedure from each other, which was a checklist, because what you tend to find is people, you actually become less competent with the more experience because you take shortcuts, and that's where the errors come in. And because in the airline industry, because of the authority principle, even when they were in a flight simulator, the air hostesses wouldn't challenge the captain because they didn't challenge authority. Now a checklist takes that away. So there are all sorts of questions so I could start the conversation saying, I read this, is this true? What's your opinion of this? Do you see where I'm going with this? And all you're doing is you're letting people open up. You're just being curious. and getting them talk.
Yeah, so sorry. I think you're talking about the Checklist Manifesto by Gawande, right? He wrote
Yeah.
that book, and it was great. It seems like it's a great concept, but it's also a muscle. Just like a muscle, it needs to be exercised and it needs to be processed. So it probably would be a good idea to look for people around you and just start being curious, because you will find that you probably stumble at first, and then you start to develop the idea, and the world opens up in front of you, because the more you ask, the more you start looking for those questions, the more there are, just like keys that you've been looking for, the example you gave earlier.
I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, exactly. And I heard somebody say a wonderful line once, which is, if you want to be a better salesperson, if you want to be a better communicator, just become more aware. That's all you have to do. Now, in the book, I talk about practice. There's different practices you can use for this to become more aware, because most people are in their little trance. So they have that little voice that goes on inside them. And you can play around with that. In NLP, you can move it around and change the sounds and have different effects. So it doesn't have the same effect on you emotionally, or it does, whichever you're wanting to do, by amplifying it or changing the tone. So you can, instead of talking to yourself, you can just start walking down the street and saying out loud, what are the things you observe? And this trains you to move your focus from an inward focus to an outward focus. And that's what we want to do, because we have two realities. We have our external reality that is being perceived by our brains, but we also have our internal reality as well, which is our imagination. And don't forget, guys, every memory you have is a lie. Now, people look at me and go, wait a minute, Derek, where are you going with this? Well, for example, you're now aware of your backside on the seat. I don't know if that translates well. You're aware of the feelings in your mouth. You're aware of the feelings in your left foot. So you can move awareness around. Now, that experience was going on, but if we were to if I said, recall the conversation over the last 5 minutes, that data wouldn't have been processed, because it has been generalized, deleted, and distorted, is not relevant. So any memory you have, you created it. So the NLP says you can change it. So it's important to realize that it's not. That's why two people can go and watch a football game, American football game. There's two big teams playing, and they can disagree about who deserved to win, because they have confirmation bias, which confirms their own views on the world, but also their processing of the data will be different to somebody else. Same game, different interpretation.
Also, why witness accounts are so inaccurate and cannot be relied upon.
Yeah, there is actually, you're absolutely right. There's something very, I came across on YouTube recently, and I was putting this in my next book I'm working on, and I couldn't actually believe this, where they had Derren Brown, the British illusionist, and what he would do is he was talking to somebody, asking for directions, and then he would say, oh, excuse me, and two men would come by with a huge big poster of Derren Brown. Once they'd passed, Derren Brown had followed the poster out, and there was a new person there who looked vaguely like him. Then he continued, he decided to push this as far as he could, and he changed into a Japanese woman. And the person still didn't notice.
No, is that right?
Well, there was an experiment done that's similar, somewhat similar, and it's pretty remarkable that people just get into their kind of pattern, and they don't.
They do,
look
yeah. I've written about the gorilla experiment as well, which I got full. I went to see Derren Brown actually years ago, and he did that trick on stage with the gorilla, and I didn't spot it. And then he turned around and said, and for your viewers, I better explain what it is. That there was about 8 people that were passing a basketball to each other. One had dark tops, the other one had white tops, and you had to count the number of passes that the people in the white team passed to each other. That's the approximation. The details may vary in the original thing, but that's how it works. So you're too busy concentrating, counting the passes, and then he said, did you notice anything unusual happening? And people went, no. And some people went, yeah, there was a man with a gorilla outfit walking past the stage, and actually went past like this going, hey! And I thought, no way. And then he played the recording back, and I was like, I can't believe I didn't see that. That's just incredible. But it just goes to show you how you see what you want to see, and our awareness skills are very, very low. So getting back to your point on eyewitness, it is actually, you're absolutely right. They're not a reliable source of information, because our memories are a lie, basically. They're our lie, and they're comfortable to us, but it doesn't mean they're the truth.
It's a really good exercise, I think, for people to participate in some of these experiments, experiences, because it's so hard for us to internalize. Like we understand, I think, conceptually, yes, we have biases. Yes, we have to process the world. It's hard. We're filtering. We're using heuristics. But the idea that our representation in our brain isn't actually what's going on, and what I'm seeing isn't what you're seeing, isn't what you're seeing, is so hard to really internalize. And then you do something like the experiment with the gorilla, and it's like, oh, I didn't see a gorilla walking across
Well,
the stage.
the other thing that's also very important is also to help people draw the conclusion or draw the identification of the fact that it's not just a fun experiment. Oh my God, that's so funny.
Right,
The
right,
gorilla
right,
was
right.
there, but the implication to the reality that we
Yeah,
experience and the fact that this is what we experience, and if we are talking, you may be experiencing a different reality, and we're having an argument about completely different things, thinking that we are talking about a reality that in fact may not exist
yeah,
as
Yeah,
objective.
it's absolutely. It's all interpretation,
Mhm.
and awareness skills as well. Don't just. It's not just with the visual part as well. It's with the auditory as well. That it's very difficult to communicate. I have to communicate with. I better not mention which company it is, but I'm on the helpline with them a fair bit, and I'll give your viewers a little trick. See, after you've given somebody, particularly if it's an overseas call center where English may not be their first language, because it's processing, it's harder to process than your native language. I always say at the end of it, can you just, I give them a summary and say, this is what I'm looking for, summarize, assuming that they haven't listened. Can you just repeat back my question?
yeah.
And they repeat back, and it's nothing to do with the question I've got. I don't know if you've seen the game Chinese Whispers. Have you seen that game?
No.
No.
It's fascinating, and I use it sometimes when I'm training people. So you'll give somebody a message, you line everybody up, and you can either have them back to back, or you can have them outside the room. You bring them in, and you just read a statement to them, and you read it once and say, pass this on. And by the end of going through 10 or 12 people, the message is so
Oh, it's a
distorted,
telephone game.
it
Right.
bears no relevance to the original
Yeah.
message. So
Yeah.
this is an issue in communication in corporate land, because what you have is think about this, you have an issue. So you speak to somebody, they then speak to the supervisor, who speaks to the manager, who speaks to somebody higher up. What chance is the original message going to be correct? So what I've done with one at the moment is I actually recorded a video and said, look, just watch the video and pass the video up, because that way it's only going to be one level of misinterpretation rather than going through 4 or 5 different interpretations, because the data is generalized, deleted, and distorted. We can only hold 7 plus or minus 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information in chunks at any one time. So it gets difficult
Yeah.
for us. Our really conscious mind's not really very good at doing things. It's good at critical thinking in some cases. You may have seen many people and think, well, I'm not sure about that one. So it's really the unconscious that rules the show, and this is why I focus so much on this in the books and practice this, so that it becomes, because once you learn to read body language unconsciously, you've then got more bandwidth in the brain to look at something else. And
Right. You make it a habit.
people would then say, well, you reading everything. You go, no, what tends to happen is, if you're doing training, for example, or I'm doing public speaking, you'll notice that somebody perhaps is just supporting the head a bit, and you think they look a bit disengaged. So you can ask them a question, get them involved, which changes the body language.
Right. 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 Right.
But it's
Yeah. It's
fun. You
really.
see, the thing is, if you can adopt in your communication an attitude of fun, you see, if you're more playful, you're going to be more charismatic anyway. I mean, it's an obvious one. I'll give you one as well for your viewers to try out. When they're in, if ever they're doing a presentation and someone asks a question, you say, what a great question that is. And just watch them go. You just have to be careful that you do it with everybody and you don't single people out. But everybody loves it because they're being acknowledged. People like to be acknowledged.
Right.
The worst thing somebody can feel is invisible.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something that I wanted to ask you about that you mentioned earlier is the idea that introverts sometimes have a harder time with these kinds of tools than extroverts. And because it strikes me that introverts are often more genuinely curious about those outside of themselves, whereas
Yeah.
extroverts are more concerned with how they're presenting themselves. So I would think in some
Yeah.
ways introverts would have a built-in advantage in that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. And some introverts are fantastic salespeople because they do listen better, do have that curiosity. Where I think it breaks down, the extroverts are difficult to pin down because they're all over the place. They speak quickly, they're emotional, and they're very general as well. So they use things like it's always, these things always happen in the company. It never works. And of course, to somebody who's very fine in detail, adjectives and adverbs are not good because they don't mean anything, do they? Adjectives and adverbs only have a meaning that you attach to them.
Right.
So if I said, I went to the shops today and I saw a woman walking slowly down the road and a car drove by. Well, what does that mean? How fast was the car going? What does slowly mean? Was it an old woman? Was it a young woman? Did she have a child with her? Did she have a bag? It's very general language. The brain doesn't like general. If I said to you the window was broken, on a conscious level you think, well, big deal, Derek. What's so important about that? But your unconscious doesn't like it because you start doing a transderivational search. What window was broken? When? By what? Is it fixed? Was it broken in isolation? So there's lots of questions. So that's what you call very general hypnotic language. But getting back to introverts, one of the ways that introverts can use the skills that they have is just to make their conversation more conversational. If, for example, I started asking too many, I'll tell you what I mean, Grant. If I said to you, this is now not to do it, I would say, if I said to you, okay, Grant, where do you live?
Princeton.
You can answer if you want or make it up.
Princeton, New Jersey.
Okay, and how long have you lived there for?
My whole life, just about.
And what is it you like about it? You see, it's starting to, you have to see how it's starting to get intrusive. Right about the third, fourth question. You're starting to go, well, look, you nosy so-and-so, what's it got to do with you? Now, the way that introverts can do this is using, there's two methods. The first one's a simpler one, which is use question, comment, question. So if I said to you, where do you live? And let's just say somebody said, I live in New York. You just say, New York, that sounds fascinating. I've heard it's a wonderful place to live. What is it you like about New York?
Right, changes it completely.
I like this. And then you make another comment. Now, when I say make a comment, this doesn't mean start talking about yourself. So it doesn't mean going, so you're like, New York, fascinating. Well, I was due to go to New York. It must have been 8 years there. That's not what to do. Now, if you want to take this a stage further, you can use the question, echo, comment, question. So you ask the question. So if I said something like, what's your favourite things to do at the weekend? And you may say, I like going to the football match, but I also like going out to the country. You say, oh, so you like going to the football match, going to the country. I can understand that. That sounds exciting and peaceful at the same time. What is it you like? Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yes.
So that's taking it. Now, because I'm using your own words, you will read that unconsciously that I'm reflecting back your reality to you because they're your words. Reality doesn't really exist. We use language to convey our version of it to each other.
Yeah.
And the more adjectives and adverbs we use, the more confusing it gets. That's why fiction has lots of adjectives and adverbs because you want the imagination involved. In business, we don't really want that sort of imagination if we're trying to communicate a technical point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you said, could you pass me the large scalpel, please? You're like, which one is it? Large compared to what? I apologize if I'm displaying my lack of knowledge of scalpels.
No, you're absolutely right. That's right.
A good example.
You would never, right? You would never do that.
But people do this, they do this in everyday life and business. So generalizations is something to pick up on, and it's really, as a trained communicator, if you're in management and somebody says that to you, you really need to explore further. Because the big tip is, do not answer a question until you know what the question's about. And I'll say that again, because it's really important. If you're business listeners here, do not answer a question until you know what the question's about. So if I said to you, Grant, this project you're running is a complete disaster. Nothing in it works. It's complete chaos. What are you going to do about it? Now, inexperienced people will answer the question by saying, oh, well, we've had sickness issues and we're behind budget. And I'm sitting there going, oh, really? I didn't know that. Thanks for volunteering that. So the better way to do this is to turn around and say, acknowledge it first of all. You don't want to say, well, I don't think it is, because then we're in a battle. We're fighting, aren't we? We don't want to fight. You say, I can understand that this has been frustrating for you. Pacing. That's called pacing. So you're reflecting back my reality to me. That diffuses me a little bit. Project management's a big component. There's many moving parts in project management. Just so that I can answer your question correctly, most effectively, which parts concern you the most? Now, what I've done is I've played tennis, so we're playing tennis. So I've gone along, or Grant's come in, nice serve to me. I have a nice backhand return. Now, there is a trick with this. If someone does it to you, what you can do is if someone does that to me, I'll say, well, Grant, if you can't see where the issues are, then we really do have a problem. Okay, but most people don't know that. It's just if it's done with you, if somebody's using it, being manipulative. But you can still go back and say, look, I'm happy, we can talk about anything you want, just in the interest of time, what parts. So these are things that can help your everyday communication.
Yeah, it's genius.
Particularly with introverts, it's make it more conversational. Try and get a bit of energy in there as well. You don't have to be you're not breathing fire and juggling balls. It's not a circus, but a little bit more energy and conversation. You know, we're not robots, we're creatures of emotion.
Is there a limit to the amount that you can use the echo before it starts to become sort of grating?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess, I mean, I actually use it unconsciously without thinking. And I was training somebody last week and I said, oh, I'm actually echoing you back. Sorry, I'm not doing this. This is not manipulative. It's just what I do. I think it's use it with common sense. I mean, I've never had anybody say you're echoing me back because you've got to remember, people don't really pay attention to anything. But unconsciously they will. If you were doing it very mechanically, these things I describe in the book are more of a step-by-step process. They're for people who struggle. A rail track, a framework, if you like, to operate with. Obviously, you don't have to echo every time and you can deviate. But using that principle, it's very useful as well if you're in business and or any situation really where you want clarification, because if anybody says you're echoing me, you say, oh, I didn't realize that. I just wanted to check my understanding because I don't want to have any misunderstanding with you.
Yeah. I particularly like how you echo it and then you give another comment after it, right? So it's like there's a acknowledgement that you understood, like I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, and then I progress it a little bit.
Correct. And really, once people understand that their reality is only peculiar to them and everybody has their own, and communication is really very, very difficult. It's really an illusion. What was it George Bernard Shaw said about communication? Is the illusion that is taking place, something along those lines. So we have to keep checking all the time that our understanding is the same. Because if we use that story about me going to the shops or the store and saw a car going by, now when I said that, you probably will have created a picture. Now your picture, I've given you quite a poetic license there. So it could have been a red car, it could have been a pickup truck, it could have been small, it could have been an EV, it could have been an old woman, it could have been a young woman, it could have been a big store, it could have been a small store, it could have been in your town, it could have been my town. All these things I've given you latitude to do that. So if you're going off in that particular direction, I want to make sure that we're on the same page. So notice how different this is. I was walking to the Co-op, which is 5 minutes walk from me, which is a small store, and I saw a lady in her 40s with a child carrying a green shopping bag, and an elderly gentleman in a red sports car, non-convertible, came driving by. It's a lot more specific, isn't it? You're less poetic. So I'm giving you less opportunity to create. Now, in some cases, we want to, if we're telling stories, we want to allow people to use their imagination, because there is something that takes place called neural coupling, which is the minute I start telling a story, our brains will start syncing. If we were to put an fMRI scanner on the brains, we'd start to see that our brainwaves start to sync. And it gets a little bit more weird than that as well, actually, exploring some of the other data, that even the intention, if you have similar intentions, your brains start to sync. So stories are a very, very good way. I mean, it's no coincidence, in my opinion, that the religious texts are all a collection of stories. They're not encyclopedias. Imagine going to your local bar out in New York and saying, did you know the average rainfall in California is X number of inches? Did you know that the tallest mountain in Scotland is this? People would say, what is wrong with you? Whereas it's more like you would say, do you know what? See the week I've had this week. You're not going to believe what has happened. I had this completely crazy guy on. Tell me more, and you pique curiosity. That's how humans work. We don't sit and recite facts.
I remember someone saying that they thought the reason that there are so many stories in the Bible, for example, is that the way that we first understand things is through stories, right? So even before society has necessarily filtered down to be able to articulate a principle per se, you can understand that principle that's illustrated through a story.
Well, if you go even further back, Harari Yuval, who wrote *Sapiens*, posits the fact that the reasons that we are who we are is through shared stories and religion and so on. The idea of country, village, and everything else, the only reason that we're able to be that is because we share stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is actually something that takes place that in order for you to understand the story, you place yourself in the story. So hypnotists will use this, they call it the My Friend John technique. So, and marketers, apologies to any of your direct marketers, here I'm giving away some of your secrets, but the direct marketers, what they will do is when they're doing a webinar, they tell their story, but it's actually your story.
Friends, we hope you're finding value in the content. If you're enjoying what you're watching, please consider hitting the like button, help us with our YouTube algorithm, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on the notification button to stay up to date with everything going on in the channel.
Derek, during the conversations, one thing you mentioned is the difference between saying yes but versus yes and. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. The language is very, very important. As we talked about, it conveys a reality. And we have to be careful with words that we use because words have power. As we talked about early on, I can say you're now aware of the feelings in the tip of your tongue or top of your roof, and you pretty much can't ignore it. If I said to you, don't think about a pink elephant or don't think about a red squirrel, you have to think about it. Okay, so language is very, very important, and it's very, very powerful, and it's very subtle as well and how it affects people. So if, for example, I said, I hear what you're saying, but my point of view is, it really means I don't hear what you're saying. It means what you're saying is irrelevant. What I'm saying is relevant. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, if you notice the difference by me saying, I hear what you're saying, and my point of view is, do you see how it joins the two together? Can you feel that? It's very subtle. We're talking about, we're in the land of emotions here, okay? So it's how it triggers you. Or if I said something like, I hear what you're saying, however, however is another one that you want to try and avoid. So we want to use conjugations, words such as and, because that links the two together, and the brain will automatically then assume that it is one sentence linking the two different parts together. But is very much a divider.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you hear salespeople use this.
You immediately feel that. Yeah.
You can, can't you? It's subtle, but you can feel it.
Yeah, it's more of a feeling. It's like, oh, you're disagreeing with me now. Whereas if you say yes and, I'm much more receptive to keep listening.
And it's also interesting the fact that when you said that, I think the normal reaction for me would be, okay, I get it. Now we're arguing. So now I'm preparing my next counterpoint instead of listening and accepting and seeing how it fits.
Yes, and
absolutely. I would agree with that. Absolutely, and a very good use of and too.
Yeah, it is amazing how those little subtle changes can change the whole tone of a conversation.
Yeah, language is very, very powerful. That's why you have to be so careful what you're saying, because the message that it communicates. Because what you may be wanting to communicate may not be the message that you want to communicate. It may be being interpreted differently. And but is one that I pretty much learned early on to get rid of. Unless, of course, you want to have the opposite effect. So if you are wanting to antagonize somebody, then you can use but. And this is very much going to be a subconscious response as well as we process language from our linguistic centers, noting that and is a very different feel to but. And a lot of this in communication is about feeling. You know, we're not doing paint by numbers. You know, human communication is complicated, and emotional impact is huge. How many times has somebody said something, or you've said something to somebody, and they've taken it the wrong way, saying, no, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. But they've taken it the wrong way. So we have to be very, very careful with the language we use, particularly if it's ambiguous as well.
And it really speaks to why you have to try to get your internal state in line with what you want to convey, because probably on a subconscious level, you're more likely to use a word like and or but, depending on how you actually feel. So if you can make yourself genuinely curious, genuinely empathic, then those things will probably be represented not only in your physicality, but the words you choose as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've often, I mean, you'll maybe have found that if you're not in the best of humour, that if you analyse your language, you'll find you're kind of fighting to make sure that you're not saying the wrong things. But there is that little part of you that wants to just say that, prod somebody a little bit if you're just not in the best of humour. You're not having a good day. So we need to guard against that, because you do get the outer expression as a reflection of the inner thought. So this is actually quite important, because when somebody's behaving like a complete idiot, it's actually quite good fun, because you know they've got internal turmoil. That's a bit of a tongue twister. Internal turmoil going on. So it's almost like a mind read, because they're expressing this through their actions and through their tonality and their choice of language. So it gives you, if you like, a window into what they're thinking, into the software that's going on within the hardware of that person.
And another interesting point that you made in the book is the use of why, right? Trying to avoid
Why, and what, These are really great, because when people go in sales trainings courses, or when they go in communication courses, people say, well, you must ask open questions. It was Kipling's Six Good Friends, wasn't it? The issue with this is you have to be careful, because some of the questions open you up and others cause more of a justification. So I'll show you exactly what I mean. If I said to you, Grant, why are you wearing that blue shirt today? Now, forget the logic. Notice how you feel. It's slightly, you think, well, A, it's none of your business. And I chose to wear it, so it's my decision. What's it got to do with you? That's the unconscious. Now, you're too polite to obviously be that rude to me. So I would be too polite to actually question your choice of shirt. Very nice shirt, by the way. But what we need to be careful of, notice how I can rephrase that and make it different. So I could say, I'm curious, Grant, what was it about that shirt that attracted you to buy it in the first place? Or what was the thing you liked most about it? You see, it's slightly different, isn't it? It's not quite as accusatory, is there such a word as that? And so why justifies behaviour? And the therapists will use why when they want people to justify their actions. But if you ask why, you know people are going to justify. Now, if you're in a business context or in a sales environment, you have what you call revivification. So you will go back, get the image in your head at the time you bought that shirt or did that particular action, and you will then justify your actions. Because remember, people resist what they're told and they accept what they conclude.
Let that process. Resist what they're told.
Yeah. So the more, and this acts on a physical aspect as well. If I was standing next to Zinovy there, and I said, right, I want you just to stand still and hold your position. The more I push on your shoulder, the more you're going to push back to stay still. So you're resisting a force. Well, the same thing happens with language as well. People don't like to be told what to do. Now, if there is an authority figure, they'll do it. But as soon as the boss is away, they'll go back to their old ways. Mm-hmm. So the best way to get somebody to do it is to get them to come to the conclusion themselves, rather than telling them what to do. And why is you're accusing somebody and they're justifying it. And the natural thing is, I think I've mentioned the expression, the FU thing, which is basically when you're forcing somebody, it's almost like, what has it got to do with you?
Right.
So, and taking that a stage further, if I was to say to Grant, look, get us a coffee, will you, Grant? You get a little voice goes, F you. Get your own coffee. Who do you think I am? Your slave? But if I turned around and said, Grant, can you get me a coffee, please? Because I'm just about to go on an important webinar with a client. What happens? I give you a reason, and the reason is plausible.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be plausible for you to believe it.
There's even something more that you talk about in your book about the because, right? About giving a reason. Sometimes the reason, it doesn't even have to make any sense, right? It just has to be. It just has to be a because. Like there's the study in front of the copier machine.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
You want to tell that one? That's one of my favorite studies. And
unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the researcher. I'll have to check that up again. But basically, what happened was to this effect. I'm praising to keep it simple. Is there was people in a line or a queue, as we say in Europe, to do some photocopying, and people were going up to skip the queue or the line to say, can I go in front of you because I have some photocopying to do. Well, everybody has some photocopying to do, but what was remarkable was the compliance level was very, very high. So if you want somebody to do something, you have to give them a reason. And this is one of the key things I would say in business, in your personal life. Always, if you can, give a reason. It doesn't have to be that great a reason either. But what it does, remember, is you always have to give somebody an escape route. As soon as you force somebody into a cornered animal always bites, as my late father used to say. There's no escape route. But if I turn around and say, Grant, could you get me a coffee? Because instead of me forcing you, the choice, a command has been given, but the choice and control is with you. You can choose whether you want to comply or not. And you may say, that seems reasonable. Yeah, it's a reasonable request. I'll do that. Do you feel the difference? And this is the part most people are missing out on. They're doing too much of the logic. I mean, you can't really logic people into dating, can you? You can't logic someone into marriage. And yet in business, we put these PowerPoint slides up with lots of logic on them in size 6 fonts and double axis graphs. Investment management, anybody watching from that area will recognize these very confusing double axis graphs that really nobody understands. You have to make it simple. And you have
Would
to
you
give
recommend, is there a place like in a place like investment banking or somewhere where really logic should be dictating, let's say, a business decision or something?
Yeah.
Do you think in those situations that there should be a blend of the two? Or, like on the one hand, I feel like if you completely ignore the logic part, there'll be red flags going up all over the place. And on the other hand, if you just do logic, you really haven't connected with someone. So, intuitively, I feel like there should be a combination of those two.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, absolutely. And you're right, because there's two aspects to that, because it's very, very quantitative, but there's also the qualitative overlay as well. And that's the bit that's perhaps underestimated. I mean, we all have brands. There may be some investment houses, if you have your own mutual funds, if you're in the States, or if you have unit trusts or OICs, if you're in Europe, then you will have companies that you naturally like. You may like JP Morgan, you may be less keen on BlackRock, and yet you won't really know why. It's a bit like if you're playing golf, there'll be certain brands that you will like and certain ones that you won't. So what you tend to do is you'll have confirmation bias that will overlay what is an emotional decision. But make no bones about it, if a fund is a bad fund, it's not performing, it doesn't matter how emotionally cuddly you get with them, they're not going to buy the fund. So you're absolutely right, but we have to understand that there is emotion justified by logic. So the logic has to be plausible to fit in to justify the emotional response, which is excitement or whatever emotion you're trying to satisfy. Because everything humans do is in response to an emotion. Everything. We either want more of an emotion or we want less of an emotion. We move towards pleasure and we move away from fear, and those are interchangeable. You're not just one particular category of person. You will change according to the situation. So if you're speaking to an investment banker and you have an investment, what's in it for him? Why would he want to buy that? What's his criteria and values? Does he have a large pension fund that has a liquidity problem? Does he have a large pension fund that perhaps has a risk issue? Does he have a diversification risk? Does he have a house concentration issue? What issue does he have? And how is your solution fitting into that?
Yeah. And it's funny as you say that, because it made me realize, we were talking with Bob Cialdini, who was talking about psychological research, and we were talking about Daniel Kahneman. And in his research, it's all about how you frame an economic question will dictate an economic response. So for example, fear of loss is much greater than the anticipation of gain. And so if you frame it in those ways, you're still using logic to an extent, but there's obviously this emotional overlay that's actually a big part of the driver.
You are, yeah, and framing is very, very important. I mean, notice how, again, getting back to language, notice how it makes you feel. So imagine that you're wanting to hire a venue for a wedding, okay? Let's just say you want to hire a venue just for a talk that you're holding, okay? And I'm the hotel owner. And you come up to me and you say, I want to hire that particular room. And I say to you, okay, that's going to cost you $10,000 for the day. Okay? Now, just notice how you feel, right? Then I do a different tact. So this time I say, That room, we charge anything up to $20,000 a day for. For you, it's $10,000. Do you notice how you feel? And it sounds
Totally
like, because what's happened is before you have to have an anchor. Your anchor was zero. So anything north of zero or up from zero is expensive.
Right.
Perhaps not a few dollars, but there comes a point it escalates. It's proportional.
Yes.
Well, it's probably not. It's probably exponential, but there we go. And then anything in the previous one, your anchor is 20,000. So psychologically, you feel like you're getting a discount.
Right.
So Kahneman's research is fascinating as he goes into it in great depth. So is Robert Cialdini's. It's fascinating. The 6 principles essentially he uses are phenomenal. I mean, if you look at his next book, which was Persuasion, they talk about priming, where if you go into a shop and you have German music, a wine shop, you have German music playing, that the German wine sales we've got, people have no idea they're being influenced. Now, there is a study as well, and I can't remember the source for this, unfortunately, is where they had wine testers and they swapped the colours of the wine around, so they thought they were drinking red wine. Yeah, and these are supposed to be people with a fine palate, shall we say. There's other. The BBC did a show years ago in the UK where they got a load of chefs. You would think they would have a heightened sense of taste and smell, and they gave them these drinks to drink. But what they did was they swapped the colours around. So the raspberry was lime, the lime was mint coloured. People were drinking. I can really taste the raspberry here, and the guy was laughing, going, "It's mint." So the visual cortex is very, very important, and it overrides a lot of the other senses. So there's something called the McGurk effect. So I'll let your listeners go into YouTube and Google that, McGurk. So it's McGurk, I believe. And that's fascinating. And even though you know that the sound is a particular sound, I'll explain it to you and you can check it up later. So what the person does is they say that the sound is ba, 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 okay? And then what you see, so if you close your eyes, that's the sound you hear. But the person's lips, so they've synced the sound ba with the person's lips going ba, 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 okay? So as soon as you close your eyes, the sound changes to ba. As soon as you open them and see my mouth going ba like that, it changes to va, and there is nothing you can do to override that. So our senses are not they're not reliable in terms of interpreting a reality. That's why fighter pilots, they say, rely on your instruments and not your senses.
Right.
And that goes back to the expectation that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. We tend to experience what we expect. As I've said, I believe I covered this in the book, that the only people you will remember on your way to work in the morning is the very attractive person. We won't go there for obvious reasons. Someone who's behaving unusually, or someone who looks unusual. So if you were walking to work in New York and suddenly there was a guy breathing fire and juggling, you would probably remember that forever. Because what happens is you go along and you see that. So you're going along in your own little trance. You don't notice the guys in suits or people that are just look like everybody else. You see somebody behaving oddly, and then you get that moment. We all have it, where we go, come out of our trance, and then we walk down the street and go, now why would somebody be breathing fire and juggling? What a bizarre thing. What's he doing? Is he practicing? And you try and logic it out.
Right.
And interestingly enough, that if you are a New Yorker, and this is what you see on a daily commute, and you see somebody breathing fire, you see somebody juggling, you see somebody doing all of these odd things, they're no longer odd and novel.
Right.
So you won't necessarily notice them, and whatever else is novel to you, that's what's going to jump out.
Exactly, and back in the 70s in the UK, we had punk rock came upon the scene where everybody had piercings and multicoloured hair, and they were up in Mohicans, and it was outrageous at the time, in chains. Now, you wouldn't even look twice because so many people adopt, different looks. But the same thing would happen and again, please correct my geography, guys, but if you went to the Midwest and you were wearing a nice, $2,000 suit and you're walking down the street, you'd probably be noticed because most people wouldn't be dressing like that. Would that be correct? Have I picked the right geographical area? I hope so.
Yeah, I think.
Or up in the rural part of Scotland.
Depends where in the Midwest, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's go in the country part. So in the rural part, let's use my own base there. In rural Scotland, if you went up to rural Scotland in some of the mountains and you were wearing a £2,000 or $2,000 suit, you would stand out. So people would remember you because you're different. So you're absolutely right, Zinovy. It's not the act itself. It's the act in comparison to what is perceived as normal and is expected by the brain in terms of its predictive mechanism.
Yeah, I did my training in New York, and the first few weeks, I still remember I was noticing everything, because it was so different to people on the street, and then after a while, it all becomes background noise, and not until you come back to Princeton would you notice someone.
And it's interesting because you grew up in Princeton.
Yeah.
We did our training in New York in the same place.
Right.
And I didn't have the same experience because I grew up in Brooklyn.
Right.
In Brooklyn,
Right.
New York, and went to the city all the time.
Right,
So-
right, 100%. Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing as if you live in a quiet area. When I lived in a quiet area and I moved to Edinburgh, and the flat or apartment I was in was right by the road, and I couldn't sleep to begin with because of the road noise.
Yeah.
And then after a while, it became normal. And then when you go somewhere quiet, it's quite weird because you're like, "What's the background noise?" So it's the same. It's exactly the same thing as you'll often see if you look on. Not that I'm a great authority on perfumes and on aftershave or cologne, but you'll see people sometimes putting reviews on there saying that the cologne, the smell didn't last very long. And that's because you get smell blindness after a while. You get used to, that's why you don't smell your own smell, pardon the phrase.
Yeah.
Because your brain gets used to it, and it's not new. But if you put on a new cologne, you would immediately smell it. So we're constantly living in this reality that is predicted by the brain, and it's really being different that will make you stand out. And that's where, on the public speaking side and on the sales side, you want to be different, but not too different that you're causing offense. Different enough to be memorable, but not different enough to be crazy.
Just a very quick aside. I took our middle daughter to it's called Ulta. It's like they sell perfumes and makeup and those kinds of products. And we walked in, and the smell was so strong. To me, it was awful. It was way overpowering. And then we were in the store for probably 20 minutes, and we go back to the beginning of it where we had smelled and we were like, "Oh, the smell's gone." And then I was like, "Oh no, it's us!" Like now we smell like that, right? Because we've internally. I mean, that's what happens, right? It becomes part of, and that was.
So one of the things, the expectation is so powerful, and it's so important. And one of the things that I loved in your book is that idea of expectation as you're coming into a conversation. Because if we're talking about spotting things, and the expectation that you have coming into the conversation, taking aside all those powerful tools that you talked about, being curious and observing the environment, and the idea that as I'm coming to talk to you, if I expect it to be a friendly conversation, something that I will gain an understanding, know you better, have fun doing, I will spot those things much more than others, which will make it more natural to do all those things. And I think that's so powerful.
Exactly, and this is why state control is so important. That's a big part. So we talk in the sales book on the belief, state control, rapport, and awareness. That's the key ingredients. And you have this natural curiosity, a lot of those things will come through. Belief is a little bit harder one to actually change. So that takes a bit more effort. And there's audio programs I've got that help people with that. They program the unconscious mind, which are it's often quite difficult when you do unconscious learning because people say, "Well, I haven't noticed any change," and you go, "Well, exactly. That's the whole point. It's supposed to be unconscious." One day you'll just notice, "Hey, I'm doing this quite well. I'm speaking well, and my public speaking is good. I'm suddenly confident." If you were consciously aware of it, your conscious mind would get in the way and fight it.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've got this, and slight dilemma. But you're absolutely right. In fact, the expectation effect, we know this actually in the scientific research for people who want to check this out. It causes a lot of problems. I mean, there was research done going back in the 70s with a random event generator where people can actually influence it was connected to a radioactive isotope. And the idea was that there would be a red light, I think, and a green light. And they would come on randomly, and people could actually influence the outcome.
Right.
And then we've got the Japanese scientist who's passed away, unfortunately, who was looking at water. He did a lot of research on water crystals, and how your emotions can affect the structure of the crystal. This all seems a bit bizarre. We're heading slightly off piste here. But one of the things with language was he had three bowls of rice. He had one where he ignored the bowl of rice, or the flask of, it was a container filling of rice and water. The next one where he gave out love and really wanted to, benevolent feelings to the rice. And the last tube was the one where he said nasty things to the rice. Now, bizarrely enough, the one that actually had the greatest decay was the one that was ignored. Then it was the one that was had the language, critical language to it. And then the one that he gave love and nice words out to actually lasted longer. So the research is there. It's not for me to comment whether it's true or not. As I say, I'm not too worried about the details. I'm more interested, does it work? If it works, use it.
Yeah.
If people like it, great. If they don't, equally fine too.
To me, all of that is fascinating, and having an open mind is, I think, really important. And also having a skeptical mind is also important. And just sort of, taking it as it comes.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting when you talk about, there's certain things that the science can't explain. You've got quantum entanglement, which is something they just can't explain, where you have the two polarities that are linked and happen instantaneously, which goes against all the Einstein's theories on relativity. So there's the double slit experiment, which I don't know if you remember from your days at physics. For the people that have not heard that before, I'll explain it to you. You have a metal plate with two slits in it, and they fire photons at the metal slits. Now, the idea is we're trying to work out, is light a particle or is it a wave? So if it is a wave, it would go through the slits and it would form an interference pattern on the photographic plate that is behind it. A bit like when you go to the beach and you see waves hitting a pier, you'll see an interference pattern. I hope this is not too boring for people listening, but the results are quite interesting. When you then put up, they wanted to decide, well, what happens at the slit in the first plate before it hits the photographic plate at the back. So they put some photon detectors there, and the active observation, as soon as they put that, changed the interference pattern at the back from interference of waves to individual dots.
Yeah.
So as Leonard Susskind, who was a professor at university in New York, I believe, I don't know if he's still there, he said it's almost like we have this reality going on and the active observation collapses it into one of the realities that we experience. But we're getting quite deep here, but there's certainly many things that we struggle to explain with science that are a mystery.
Yes. Yeah, I think, especially when you get into the quantum world, if it doesn't humble you and your sense of intuition, then you're not really understanding the quantum world, because it's innately.
And at the same time, it's a great idea to back away from that, dive deep, but back away and say, to your point, how applicable is this? Does this work?
Yes.
It's great. On one hand, it's okay not to have all the answers. Be curious, but does it work? Does it affect you? Because that was part of the conversation with Evan Alexander. Is on one hand, does that exist? Do you have this near-death experience and everything that's entangled in that? But on the other hand, how does it change the way you live your life now? And if it does, then terrific. Then,
yeah,
absolutely. Which gets back to the basic thing in any sales situation, which is which means that. So what does this mean? That's the technical part. What does it actually mean for the end user? And that's really people who will be far more knowledgeable about physics than myself, have working knowledge, will perhaps do more research into that. But what does it actually mean? Well, what it means is that reality is perhaps not as we perceive it, that everybody has as their own one. So the main thing for us as communicators is to realize that. And that's why I spend time in the book on this, because if people can come to their own conclusions that, hey, wait a minute, this is not perhaps the way I see it. We all agree there's trees in the background there. I hope we do. But the way you perceive that may be different to the way I perceive it. And you also have some females of what you call tetrachromic. So they have an extra cone. Most people have three. They can perceive, and these interact to give you a sense of color. Females who are tetrachromic have an extra cone on their retina, so it enables them to perceive different shades of color. So to them, they would think, well, why can't you see this?
Yeah.
It's only happens to females because it's on the X chromosome, not on the Y chromosome. The same as males are. You have about 10%, 8 to 10% of males are colorblind.
And actually, to tie that with another aspect that you were talking about, and kind of back to the expectation, and to tie the language and the expectation and the color, the study that showed that language makes a difference in terms of the colors that you can perceive. And comparing, they were comparing English blue versus Russian, that distinguishes light blue, has a different word for light blue and dark blue, and the ability of people to distinguish those colors enhanced because there was a separate word in their language describing that word.
Correct. Well, to name something brings it into existence, you see, which is why Bruce Lee was so reluctant to name his martial art, because to name it brings it into existence, which then limits it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Can I pivot?
Pivot.
You mentioned something before that I wanted to pick up on, but I didn't, so now it'll just be an awkward pivot. Tonality. How should we think of tonality, and how should we use that in our conversations?
Yeah, tonality is a big one, and you can create different effects with the tonality. So I'll show you that one of the things you need to be aware of for your US visitors is, or US viewers, is that if you go up at the end of a sentence, that implies a question. So in Europe, a lot of the Latin languages, they will say something like "ce n'est pas." So they go up, it sounds a question, doesn't it?
Yes.
Whereas when you have a command, it goes down. So if I said you get down, you're under no illusion as to what that means. It's a command. So we need to be very careful. There are certain parts of the country, certainly in Glasgow, certain parts of Glasgow in Scotland, where they go up at the end of the sentence. And I've heard some American accents where people go up at the end of the sentence. So if you're wanting to give a command, particularly if it's an embedded command within doing public speaking, you need to be careful with that. Now, we can change, just by changing our tonality, we can put energy in so we can become more excited and get people enthusiastic and get them interested. But sometimes
A lot of energy.
we want to draw them in. And when we pause, we speak quieter, we have a pattern interrupt. And it draws people in. So you can see by just using that simple thing. So public speakers will do this. We'll build up. And then when it comes to a key point, you can use a pause, and this ties in with tonality, to make an important point. So if I may be saying, normal pace, speaking like this, blah, 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 and then all of a sudden I say, but the key point to remember is we must focus attention. Do you see? Downward, it's a command. And your unconscious mind will pick that up because there's a gap, a change. It's like the children or the kids in the car. You put them in the car, you drive along, they fall asleep. Then when you stop, they wake up because it's a pattern interrupt. It's a change in the external environment. Remember, it's exactly the same using tonality as it is seeing a pirate down the street. It's different. So the mind suddenly pays attention. So it's important to use that tonality and to make sure that you vary it as well. So it probably won't come across here because the sound will be compressed through the microphones, but you can make your voice louder and more excitable and commanding. And equally, you can slow it down and speak softly.
Yeah.
And we won't see my hands here, I don't think, on the screen, but you can actually then use your hands to emphasize the message further, which is called an embedded command. So it'll be something like, I'll bring them into view, hopefully we can see. So I may say normal pace and say it's key that we learn to communicate better. Do you see? So I'm almost drumming it home. So what I've got is an analog mark with my hands and an analog mark with my voice, together with a pattern interrupt, which is a pause, and then a downward command. So there's lots of advanced communication things going on there. You'll see politicians do this all the time. It's strange that they're good at that, isn't it?
It's like they
I
train.
wonder who taught them.
Well, and it's like so many things, like even if you're training a muscle and you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you won't get as much out of it, so you have to change up how you're exercising it. And I feel like pattern interrupts are kind of like that. You can overuse them, and then you kind of almost it becomes grating. But if you use it just enough, it's so effective.
It is so effective, and I'm echoing you there. Sorry, I suppose I'm happy. It is so effective.
No, I love what you're saying.
But it's so effective, and that's this is one of the things as a public speaker. If you detect that you're presenting and somebody's drifting off, maybe they're just on their phone, they're going like this, and they're not paying attention. If you just suddenly see, silence. You see how powerful it is? But what it automatically does is draws everybody's attention in, because we're all just curious, nosy people. We want to know what's going on. Something has changed in the environment, The brain needs to process it. It's not as the pattern was predicted. Something's changed, has to come to conscious awareness. So you can do this, and the idea is you should, if you're doing public speaking, you should be changing this every 7-8 minutes to keep people engaged.
That's a good rule of thumb, about 7 to 8 minutes.
Yeah, about that. And to use questions as well, because questions are actually very, very powerful. And we've talked a bit about questions today, but you can't help but answer a question. And you can use...
Can you?
You can't. I mean, you think about them, and you can actually use certain tag questions at the end, can't you? But if you overuse them, they can become a bit annoying.
Can't they?
So we don't want to overuse them, do we? But you can use them, and it becomes quite funny after a while, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If you use it conversationally, it's quite useful, isn't it? But now it's starting to get annoying, isn't it? So we can use this, but what that does is that sets up what you get is, I call it the nodding dog. So if you're in the audience, this is quite fun, because if you're presenting or you're speaking to somebody, you want to get them engaged. Notice the difference here when I say here. Let's suppose we're talking investment, okay? And I said to you, the performance of our fund is very strong, okay? And I've got a chart. There's nothing for you to do, is there?
Right.
And if I said to you, I'll show you the chart and say the performance is very strong, isn't it? You see, you're nodding. Replay the video back. You're doing the nodding, which is what I call the unconscious. So you can't, and you will find people in the audience doing that. They will nodding. Now, when you're in a business meeting or if you're presenting to people, you want to get people doing that. So you can put in these tag questions, which are useful.
Yeah.
So,
by the way,
I
I was listening to your Audible book on the how to talk to anyone. And you do this a lot in there, and I was laughing. It was extremely charming, and it really drove home the point too about how A, it can be really effective, and B, it can become, really annoying if you just, as you were doing it to show how annoying it could be. It's like, yes, that does get, it does get too much, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does get too much, doesn't it? As I've echoed you back and then done a tag question back. Oh, we're having fun today, aren't we? So yeah, but it's a useful technique.
Definitely.
And it's something that people can intersperse. And it's like anything. A surefire way to master everything is to try everything at once. Sorry, a surefire way, get it right, surefire way to fail is to try everything at once. I'm getting tongue twisted. The best way the brain learns is to break it down into small little chunks. So you start off and you say, I'll practice my open questions today. If you're a bit more advanced, you may throw in some tag questions.
Right.
You may think, today I'm going to practice with body language. I'll perhaps doing some mirroring, some pacing. I'll do some leading. I'll maybe match the pace that they're walking at. These are all things that you can do because you know that your unconscious mind is taking care of the other parts. When I train people to speak, and even in any sales situation, one of the things they fear most is knowing what to say. And they say, I just completely clam up. And by the end of it, I'll have them I'll say, stand up and talk to me about why nuclear physics is an exciting topic. And they will talk away about it. It's not difficult. Once you have the confidence to know you can speak about anything, and I mean anything, it doesn't have to be factually correct, but if you deliver it the correct way, people will actually think, yeah, that sounds true.
So you've seen our...
But it's the confidence to link. The brain works by association. All you do is work it through association. You use some techniques. There are certain techniques that you can use. They work every time, and it's very, very easy.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can we pivot for a second?
Pivot away?
All right. So a couple of things that we wanted to touch on is you give a lot of interesting techniques in your book. Can you talk about the idea of approaching a group? Let's say if you're in a setting where you need to approach a group, what kind of techniques, what kind of tools? How do you think about doing that?
In terms of building rapport with them or controlling the group?
In a social setting.
Or presenting?
No, in a social setting, if you need to
Social
approach...
setting.
Like you go into a group and you want to be part of the group.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're part of the group. Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things you'll notice is if you're in a group, you'll find that you can sometimes not be accepted. Okay? Mm-hmm. So people will be facing each other. You hear about face-off. They'll be chatting away. And then you want to try and open them up, but you want a space as well. So you have to be careful when you go in there. You're not going in and taking over. But equally, you want to try and integrate with them. So it's quite tricky. But one of the things you can do is you have to influence. If it's a group you want to influence them, you want to influence the strongest character. Now, you know the strongest character, the alpha male, because everybody's feet will point towards them. So your feet point to the person you're attracted to, and also to the dominant person. So when you're going in there, if it was a group, you have to go in and you could make a situation comment. So it must be something like, this is a fantastic building here. It was converted a few years ago. What did it used to be before? Now, by doing that, you're getting people away from the conversation they're having, and then talking about an external factor that you can both agree on. So that's one of the things you can do. With groups, once you get hold of the group, you want to make sure if you're talking, you want to make sure that you're not isolating anybody in the group. And if you're doing a talk or something to a group, if you're online, you're always looking to spot the friend. So friendly face. One of you'll notice if people are listening, their head will tilt to one side. So Zinovy, at the moment, if you play this back at this point, you'll see your head's just slightly tilting to one side. Now that's an indication of listening, and then you have a nod afterwards as well. So this is a great technique, and I used to use this when I was in work, because if I was at a meeting, and let's just say some of them were, how can I be polite, less than interesting? Or perhaps could have been more interesting is perhaps the best way to do it. So one of the things you can do is tilt your head to one side, and you just nod occasionally. And that gives an unconscious response that you're listening. And again, in a group as well, you want to get people opening up. So you want to get people talking about themselves. As soon as people talk about themselves, it becomes easier. Not about you, about yourself.
And if you're
and what you find is people will often come back and say, you're a fantastic conversationalist. You think, well, I haven't actually said anything. You've told me everything about it. There was one individual in business years ago I used to go and see. His name shall remain nameless, not too far from here. And I remember I used to go and say, oh, Derek, I'm just so busy. I've got so much to do. I'm just so behind. And then 2 hours later, I was still there. And I remember thinking, well, if you didn't speak so much and talk to me.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully that gives some pointers with groups. The dynamics are different in terms of what you're doing, whether it's a social group or whether it's more of a business.
Right. But as a general rule, it sounds like what you're saying is identify the alpha, man or woman, and direct your initial comments at least towards that person to open it up.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're in a social situation or even business and you want to get everyone else to agree, you will have the alpha male. People will tend to hang on there every word, or the alpha female for that matter, the alpha person, let's call it that. Yeah. So once you identify them, and the clues that you see there, they usually will have bigger body language. Often the head will be back to indicate authority. You often see little movement as well, unless they're an extrovert, in which case they're all over the place. They're dancing like there's a hamster down their trousers or their pants, I think we said in America. But they tend to be very controlled. So if you're seeing a dominant person, which is often the case in these environments, because the outer expression is a reflection of the inner thought, they are all about control. So hence their external persona with the body language is all about control. And they make themselves bigger as well. Whereas people who lack confidence will be like this. They bring their shoulders in. It's almost like they're trying to vanish.
Right.
But the key thing is you have to influence, in a group, you have to influence the alpha person first, and then the rest will fall into shape. And you know that by the way their feet are pointing, and they will all turn around to them as well.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Great. All right. So since we're doing this kind of rapid fire type of points for techniques, you also mentioned about building a rapport with the person that you really disagree with.
Yeah. And in terms of if you've got different points of view. Yeah, well, let's use the one I used in the book was guns. So we'll use that. It's probably quite apt for the US audience. So let's suppose this is quite difficult because you may have a strong political view, or you may have a strong religious view, or something that is diametrically opposed to the person that you're speaking to. So you don't want to lie, but equally you don't want to break rapport. So you want to be truthful to yourself, but you don't want to lie just so you can build rapport with them. So what you can do is use some clever language there. So somebody may say, let's just say we've got a pro-gun owner and someone who's against guns, okay? So let's just suppose somebody who is against the guns says, this is terrible what's going on with guns. We need to get something done about this. And I think it needs to be done now. Well, of course, if you turn around and you're a pro-gun owner, and you start arguing. Remember, to break rapport, just emphasize differences. To build rapport, emphasize similarities. That's all you have to do. So how do we do that? Well, one of the things we can do is use vague language. You can say, the gun situation is really complicated, and I agree it needs to be looked at. Now, what you will do is you'll interpret that I'm on the same side as you, but I haven't said that, have I? I've said it's complicated. What does complicated mean?
Yeah.
Yeah? So that's one of the techniques you can use. You can use vague language to get around. And people will, as we mentioned earlier, will attach a meaning, the meaning that they want to attach, that they interpret according to their reality. Yeah. It was interesting to show you how I tried something when I was doing some training last week, and I thought I'm just going to throw in a random word to a sentence that completely doesn't make sense and see if anybody spots it. And I said it's important, Bank, when you speak to people, that you really take into account what they're saying. And then I started using a complex thing like, it isn't what you haven't yet not said that isn't not relevant, but rather what you should have but didn't that's causing the problem, isn't it? And they all went,
oh my God.
And they all started nodding, and I said, what did I say? And they said, I said, why are you nodding? What did I say? You can't understand that, can you? I've got double negatives. So, and then I said, do you notice anything else? None of them spotted it, because I delivered it in such a way,
right.
I was standing up, remember, I delivered it in such a way they wouldn't expect to hear it. Mm-hmm. And that just goes to show you how low awareness is.
Yeah.
So people will attach the meaning they want to that. And even if they don't understand that sentence, which is just about impossible, play it back, see if you can understand it. It's just about impossible to understand because there's too much going on, too many double negatives. It's confusing, which is what it's meant to be. It was to illustrate the purpose.
Yeah. It really goes also to emphasize the importance of the heuristics that we present from ourselves, right? The way you dress, the tonality, the kinds of things that create the overall emotional impression, because then the mind will fill in the words more in accordance with what they're expecting.
Sure, and I think, dresses, people say don't judge a book by its cover. Well, being an author, I'm afraid they do judge it by the cover. And it's important, and I've changed covers and seen sales go up or down, depending on the cover I put on. They've gone up, thankfully, when I changed the sales book cover, because before it was too dark. It looked a little bit too 90s. Now it's a bit more simple and plain. So people will judge you, and remember, it's their model. Humans are quite lazy. We don't want to process every single bit of information. We just want to do it as simply as we possibly can. So we will use our own biases and our own view of the world. So if you see somebody wearing a suit, you assume that they're professional. And research has been shown that people who walk across the road wearing a suit are more likely to be followed by people than those that are not wearing a suit. And we come back to the outfits. Why do you think politicians wear a tie? Why do you think the police wear a uniform? Why do the army wear a uniform? Why does a judge wear robes? Why do religious figures wear outfits? It's in order to create an impression.
Yeah.
And we create an impression not just through our tonality, but also the way we present, which includes our body language. But a big part of body language is the way we adorn ourselves. If I was a corporate lawyer advising Microsoft or Google or something like that, and I turned up, well, maybe it might work these days, I don't know, but I turned up with my KISS Final Tour t-shirt on, I don't think it's going to create the right impression.
Right.
Except if it's somebody who is a massive, massive fan, then all of a sudden you've got this hot button and you've got this micro hobby where we both align. But generally, it does not create the right impression, because you associate a lawyer and somebody who is knowledgeable about the law to dress and act a certain way. It's the same with religious leaders. You wouldn't expect them to be there with shorts and an Iron Maiden t-shirt on it, just in a baseball cap. It doesn't quite fit in with the image they're trying to portray. So it's really important when you do this, the way you conduct yourself will start any communication process. It begins way, way before the actual words. The words are important, as we've said, but it's the perception. Perception governs reality, and you create perception through your demeanor and the way you adorn yourself, through your clothing and your body language.
It's funny. It seems this is a little bit off. This is a little bit askew, but as you were saying those things, it seems to me that when you have like a real maverick, very successful like a Mark Zuckerberg or something like that, and they'll often present themselves in like a t-shirt, and I think it's sort of like, look, I'm so far above it that I'm able to dress down and you can't do anything about it. And I think that that's very effective for those people. But then what ends up happening is that people who are less successful, we see those people and we're like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. But when you do it, it really doesn't work the same way because you're not Mark Zuckerberg. And I'm specifically thinking of the show Billions, where the main hedge fund guy, when he's trying to raise money, he goes out in a suit and it just doesn't feel right. Nobody wants to engage with him. And then he puts on his Metallica t-shirt and it's like he's back. Like the Maverick is there. And so there are those people that it can work for. It's just that 99.9% of us aren't those people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit a very valid point there. If you're a maverick, you will see people, I remember back in the days, Richard Branson, had the beard and never used to wear a tie. And you've seen Zuckerberg. And then we saw, what was in Jack at Twitter, with the big long beard to look different. Yeah. They can get away with it. And that's fine if you are in that position. And if you are a maverick, you can do that. However, it's almost the same in investment terms. If you were looking at, you play the percentage game, it could work, but the likelihood of it not working is greater. So I'm not telling people how to dress, far from it. What I'm saying is, if that is the culture within a firm, that they're wearing their Iron Maiden t-shirts or their heavy rock t-shirts, whatever, then yes, if you dress that way, you're going to fit in. But make sure your t-shirt's just a bit smarter than theirs. That's usually the guide. You're a bit smarter than people you're visiting. But if you go into a corporate law firm, it's not going to work. If you work in advertising and you turn up with the typical London three-piece or two-piece suit with the pinstripe, they're going to think you're some sort of stiff. You lack creativity because you're too programmed. So it's fitting in with the audience. If you're arrange some seminar, you're talking about bodybuilding, you're going to want to have a t-shirt that shows your biceps, your muscles off. You're not going to wear an Afghan coat, are you? So it's all about fitting in with the audience, and that's the trick. You're absolutely right. There's no set formula. It's the same as, if you're a financial advisor and you were going to see a client in a remote part of the world, some of the areas in Scotland, you turn up with your pinstripe suit, they're not going to like it. Right. But equally, they don't want you turning up with just Wellington boots and overalls.
Right. Yeah. Know your audience.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing, with the white coats. I mean, doctors wearing white coats as well. It's part of it's what you expect.
Yes.
If you go to a hospital, you may like the fact that your doctor is a heavy metal fan, but I think I prefer a white coat.
There was a study about doctors, actually, where they had doctors either in I think it was a shirt and tie with a white coat, or scrubs. I think those were the three. Mm-hmm. And as someone who doesn't like to wear a white coat, and I haven't worn one since fellowship, I was a little disappointed to see that people prefer the white coat. they want the uniform. They really want, you're a doctor, look like a doctor. I'm like, what? But I'm just, but there is something built in about that.
It's strange, and having the stethoscope around the neck as well adds more to because you've got the placebo effect. It's all suggestion, isn't it? Everything in life is suggestion. And you're more likely, there's been loads of research. I mean, placebo is and I've written about that in the books, it's a fantastic area to explore. You're absolutely right. But, if you were going along and you expect your doctor to look a certain way, but equally you would expect, other professions to look a certain way. And it's kind of just getting that. I guess the trick is being different enough that you're noticed. So they notice there's something quirky about that guy. Right. But not that it causes... You're so far out is what is expected. It is frustrating because it shouldn't matter, should it? It shouldn't really matter at all. If you've got the skills, whether you're wearing a t-shirt and a vest, or I think you call them tank tops, a tank top and shorts, it shouldn't really matter. Vest, I think, it's a waistcoat. Anyway, we're on language barriers already. So, no.
Well, I think the importance of dress is also it's sort of you're showing that you understand the situation you're in.
Exactly, yeah. And I think, for when I worked in asset management, the easy way, it was quite easy because you had your suit and tie, and then if you wanted a bit more casual, you took your tie off. You wanted to be more casual, you took your jacket off.
Yeah.
You kept the pants on, of course. That was going to stage.
that was before all the online stuff, and no one needs pants anymore.
Right. Yeah, of course, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very different world. But I still get back to when I'm training people, saying, all you have to do is use what I call the mirror technique, which is just you reverse the roles. So imagine that you were going for legal advice. What would you expect to see? if you would be happy with somebody portraying themselves in a certain way, fine. But it's always safer to be on the cautious side. I mean, talking about Zoom as well and being online, I mean, I've got enough lighting rig here to make, the latest Kiss farewell tour look proud. I'm very well lit up. I can hardly see it. It's that dazzling. But if you think about it, what we normally we associate light and brightness with being good and something being dark. We talk about dark and dingy. So why do people, when they're on calls, not bother putting a light on?
Right.
I had one I did, which was an extreme where the guy was a silhouette. It was like speaking to a Bond villain.
Are you sure he wasn't the Bond villain?
Mr. Bond.
That's funny. Yeah, it's so important to pay attention to all of those things, and that's why your books are so great. And I like this about psychology books in general, is that a lot of times they'll express things, and you think like, well, of course, in a way, but really it's not. Of course, it's something that has to be brought to your awareness, and then and then you're like, I should know that, or I did know that, but you didn't really. It needs to be articulated, and if it's not brought to the forefront, then it really, we really tend not to pay enough attention to those things.
And then also that goes away, right?
Yes,
so you read it, you understand it, you realize it, you have the aha moment, and then a month later you read it again, you have the same aha moment because you realize, oh, I completely forgot about that. That still holds true.
Yeah, they're saying you have the same aha moment, but yet it still holds true later.
Nice echoing.
Thank you.
And I like...
well, absolutely. I mean, anything you're not aware of controls you.
Right,
Yes.
right.
So heightened awareness is a very, very good skill to have. And that's what I said early on. If you want to be good at anything, just increase your awareness skills. And that comes with practice, because so many people don't focus on that particular area. And it's something that can serve you well. I mean, just your observational skills helps you with communication in general, conversation starting.
Right.
And also reading the environment. If you're a public speaker, reading the environment. If you're a sales situation or a business meeting, you want to find out who are the friends and the foes before you start off. So this is all being processed by your mind very quickly. And it just comes with experience.
Yeah. I think in the beginning, all of the techniques, and this is why it's so nice how the way that you go through it is to make people, like in this conversation, to understand where the biases, where the issues are coming from, rather than just a list of questions or techniques. And yet, like you said, if you pull out a few techniques and you just practice those and let those become more part of your vernacular, then you can, free up the conscious mind to go after the next one.
That's right, and you're absolutely right. And it's just practice with this, but we don't want to get too techniquey. That's why I think if you can understand how people are wired, because nobody actually gives us an instruction manual. We go to school and we'll learn calculus or algebra, maybe a foreign language. We'll learn maths, we'll learn physics, we'll learn chemistry, biology, but nobody actually says, look, here's the manual of how you work.
Right.
This is what you do. You create pictures in your mind. This is how people think. These are the biases that we all have. Confirmation bias, recency bias. The list is endless.
Yeah.
Loss aversion, as we talked about earlier, is a big one.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Derek, you've been so generous with your time with us today. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
This is really interesting. I love,
terrific.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Thank you.
I love the way you expand on the topics that we've read already in your book, and you give it more color, more depth, and so
yeah, they're really easy, nice reads. By the way, I think people will really, really like them.
Thank you, Rich.
It's really engaging, and there's a lot of takeaway points, which is something.
and the
I really
audiobooks are
appreciate.
very nice because of the way you illustrate things. and the
Yes,
way you echo
yeah.
and-
I like that you read your own audiobook.
Yes.
That's really nice.
Yeah, that's it's it takes a bit of doing. There's quite a lot of time involved in that, but it's fun to do. And I think as well it just simplifies it. I think if you're going to give information out, I think it's far better if I can give it out myself. I prefer that because I know how it's going to be delivered. They just have to get over my Scottish dulcet tones, but
No, it's nice.
but I think it's good and it's enjoyable to do. It's hard work, but it's good and it's enjoyable.
Well, we will look forward to your next one, which I'm sure
Yes.
is coming soon.
And we'll put links to to
Yeah, it's all
of
of these.
them,
Oh,
yes.
100%.
Thank you,
Thank
Brian. That's
you
very
so
kind
much,
of you.
Derek.
Thank you. Yeah, should have the next one out hopefully in the next few months. I'm just editing at the moment, so fingers crossed.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
And then maybe we can get together and have another conversation.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, pleasure. That's been real fun today. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for inviting me on today. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great to meet you. It's been good fun.
Likewise.
Like-
Friends, thank you for your attention. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you find value, please remember to hit the like button, help us with our YouTube algorithm. Consider subscribing to the channel and turn on the notifications so you can stay up to date with everything going on with the channel. And please leave us a comment, let us know what you thought about the show and also what you'd like to hear about in the future.